How's it going, everyone? My name is Jonah, and welcome to my true crime podcast, where we will be covering true crime, unsolved mysteries, paranormal stories, and some tall tales. So today we're going to be starting with a true crime case, and most of my channel will be on true crime. So I am Mong, and I'm going to try to cover a lot of Hmong true crime cases just because I feel like they're not covered at all. And today is going to be one of those. So let's go ahead and take a deeper look into this case. On July 2nd, 2021, Delila Yang will return home from a sleepover to find a large, freshly dug hole in her backyard. When she asked her mother about this hole, she would be told that it was dug for renovation purposes. Delila's mother would then to go on and tell her that her stepfather, Ku Yang, had also walked out on their family and that she had no idea where he's gone or if he's ever coming back. However, Delila began to suspect that her mother wasn't telling her the truth and that she would soon uncover the sinister truth behind her stepfather's disappearance and the hole in the backyard. On July 22nd, 2021, an unknown caller would make a call to the police requesting that they do a welfare check on Ku Yang as they had not seen him in weeks. Now, Ku, or we will be calling him KY to make it easier, was actually married to a woman named Karina C. Her, and we'll just call her Karina to make it easier as well. But Karina and KY were in the process of getting a divorce. And despite the fact that they were in the process of getting a divorce, they did agree that they would continue to live in the same house until renovations were done and the house was sold. Now here's when the story starts to unfold. When an unknown caller makes a call to the police telling them about KY's disappearance and requesting a welfare check, Karina will also make a call to 911 on the very same day. She will also tell the dispatchers that she had not seen her ex-husband since and that she wasn't sure where he's gone. The authorities would then head over to KY and Karina's residence on 1176 Kenner Street in St. Paul to complete the welfare check. And when they arrived at the residence, they would be greeted by Karina, who would speak to the officers and tell them that yes, she hasn't seen KY since the 30th of June and she doesn't exactly know where he's gone. She informed the police that he's probably gone to see his sister in Oklahoma since he has been talking about visiting them in the past. Karina will also tell the officers that she tried to reach KY numerous of times throughout the week, but she's never been able to get a hold of him. And every time she tried to call him, it would go straight to voicemail. And because she wasn't able to get a hold of him, she decided to call the police to file the missing report because she was concerned. Now, this is when things get even stranger. After the officers had spoken with Karina and they left the residence, that very same day, later in the evening around 9:30 p.m., Karina's daughter, Delila Yang, will also make a call to 911. The then 17-year-old Delila Yang will tell the officers that she and her siblings had not seen KY for several weeks. Now, she will also tell the officers that as she had been away for a few days at a friend's house, Delila's younger sister will send her a text message reading, "Mommy is suspicious." Delila's younger sister will also tell her that Karina had taken her on a mysterious trip to a wooded area in Taylor's Falls, having with her a bag containing a long object. Now, when Delila asked her sister if she could remember what was in the bag, her sister said she didn't really get a good look. But when they got to the wooded area, Karina would step out of the car with that bag and that object, and she would go into the woods for a few minutes and then return empty-handed. Karina, Delila's younger sister, would then make the long drive home without making any stops and without any explanation as to what that was all about. Delila will also state that on June 30th, 2021, as she was spending time at a friend's house, she would receive a strange phone call from her mother asking her to spend the night there. And this was extremely weird for Delila because her mother would never allow her children to do sleepovers at other people's houses. So Delila was surprised by the request, but she agreed and spent the night at her friend's. Then, the next day, Karina would call Delila again and she would ask Delila to spend one more night at her friend's house. Now, what raised suspicions to Delila was that at the end of the second phone call, she was surprised to hear her mother say, "I love you." Now, most people, a parent, especially a mother, saying "I love you" to a child shouldn't be anything out of the ordinary. However, for Karina, this type of affection was not ordinary at all for their normal daily conversations. Karina wasn't very affectionate with her children. She rarely said "I love you" to her children, and in fact, Delila states that there's only been 3 times in her entire life where she's heard her mother say "I love you" to her, and this was one of them. So on July 2nd, when Delila returns home from her sleepover to find that KY is gone from the home, there is now a suspiciously freshly dug hole in their backyard. And on top of the hole was a large tarp covering it. So Delila couldn't see what was inside the hole due to the tarp, and although curious, it never occurred to her to check what was underneath the tarp. When Delila asked Karina about this hole in their backyard, Karina would explain that she was just preparing the ground to build a shed in order to add resale value to the property.
There's like a hole. It kind of looks like where you would bury a body. Maybe that's his grave, or maybe mine.
Adding to the raised suspicions, Delila notices that the camera that was once mounted in their home in the garage had now been removed. She did find all of this kind of strange, but not strange enough to think that anything horrible could have happened. And within a few days of Delila being back, Karina would quickly begin to fill the hole back up, lay down bricks, and would begin to erect the shed in their backyard over the hole that she had dug. As more time went by and KY still did not return home, Delila would become increasingly worried about him. Although KY was their stepfather, he and Delila had a very close relationship with one another. So it just wasn't like KY to get up and leave without saying a word to her. There have been many times in the past where Karina and KY would get into an argument and KY would have to leave the house for a few days, but he would never leave for more than 1 or 2 days. So for him to have been gone for this many days now, it raised a lot of suspicions for Delila. Now KY owned and drove a red pickup truck, and whenever he left the house, he would always take this truck with him. But when Delila returned home from her sleepover that July 2nd, the truck would still remain on their driveway. Karina and KY did also own an RV that either Karina or KY would stay in when they had their disputes. But apparently after KY's disappearance from the home, Delila remembers that her mother had apparently asked one of her brothers to come to their home and move the RV to Delila's grandmother's home in Wisconsin. And about a week later, on July 9th, KY's red truck in her driveway would also disappear and had apparently been moved by Karina. At that point, Delila wasn't sure if the red truck had been moved up to her grandmother's as well, or if it had been disposed of somewhere else. Delila still wasn't able to get in touch with KY. She had tried to call him numerous times, but her phone calls would go straight to voicemail, and when she would send him a text message, the messages would say delivered, but he would never respond. To make matters worse, every time Delila tried to talk to her mother about what happened to KY, like where he's gone, why did he leave, and his whereabouts, her mother would go into a fit of rage and yell and curse at her. She would cry and yell at Delila hysterically, and because of this, Delila just stopped asking her mother what happened to KY. So instead, Delila would decide that she would just try to figure out where her stepdad had disappeared to on her own. So on July 9th, 2021, the same very day that KY's red truck would go missing from the driveway, Delila would sneak into KY and Karina's bedroom, and she would begin to look for clues about his whereabouts. Delila would find that KY's clothes were all missing from the bedroom, but he did not take one important thing with him, his toolbox. And this was a major red flag for Delila because KY never went anywhere without that toolbox. He would have never left the house for days without the toolbox since it was part of his life and his job. Upon further investigation, Delila will also spot that there was a dent in the bed sheets of her parents' mattress. So she decides to pull back the bed sheets, and when she does, she finds that there is a large gaping hole in the mattress. It was as if this hole had been cut into the mattress to remove something. And during that conversation that Delila had with the officers on the phone, the very first one on July 22nd, she will also tell the officers that her mother had a permit to carry a firearm and that she would regularly go to the shooting range. The conversation that Delila had with the officers on July 22nd was a 2-hour-long conversation on the phone. And when that conversation was over, Delila even expressed that she wasn't sure if the officers believed anything she said, but luckily they did. And they would look into the case on July 25th. So the authorities would go around the block, around Karina's residence, and they would start to begin to speak to the neighbors. One of the neighbors did tell authorities that they had not seen KY at the residence since the very beginning of July. That neighbor would also tell the authorities that around July 5th, for about a week after that, there would be this horrible rotten smell coming from the backyard of Karina's home. Another neighbor would tell the authorities that weeks prior to KY's disappearance, Karina had visited that neighbor's parents to ask them about their previous home sale. Karina had told the neighbor's parents that she and KY had plans to renovate their home and then sell it for around $300,000. Then weeks later, Karina will abruptly change her mind and will tell the neighbors that she is going to sell the house as is and just put it on the market. By July 23rd, around the same time period, the authorities will find KY's missing red truck parked around 4 blocks down from his residence. Neighbors in that area told the authorities that some unknown driver had driven the car there, parked it there, and had just left it there for weeks. And on July 28th, about 5 days later, the authorities would also find KY's missing RV parked in a storage facility in White Bear Lake. As the police investigated the storage unit, they would find dozens of totes filled in KY's clothing stored in that storage. So on July 29th, the next day, the officers would bring with them a search warrant for the home and then a cadaver dog. When the cadaver dog was searching the property, specifically in the backyard, the dog would show interest immediately in the shed's handle and the shed's door. The dog's handler reported that this interest the dog was showing indicated there was decomposition or blood present within the area. And when searching inside the home, the authorities will also find blood present in various parts of the home. In one of the bathrooms, they will find blood spatter on the walls, and the authorities will also note that the walls had been recently painted over as if somebody was trying to hide the splatter of blood. There was also blood on the window covering in that very same bedroom, as well as blood in the home's laundry room in the garage. The authorities would also find a carpet cleaning machine, and within the machine there was also blood. So this indicates that Karina had used the carpet cleaning machine to clean blood off the carpets within their home. So here they are now with a missing person and tons of blood splatter all around the house and a cadaver dog indicating that there could be a human body present within the premises. Now police know that whatever has happened to KY now could not be a good thing. So now they take Karina in for questioning, and investigators will ask Karina again, what happened to your ex-husband? Where did he go? What happened to him? And Karina will once again tell the authorities that she had not seen KY since June 30th. She would just mention KY going to Oklahoma to see his family, and she mentions how KY uses marijuana, which was a bit of a weird statement to make. So the investigators would then take this opportunity to ask Karina about the foul smells that the neighbors had been reporting coming from her backyard. To which Karina would tell them, she had a coop of pigeons, so the smell was most likely coming from the pigeon poop. But if you ever raise birds or chickens of that sort, you will know that the smell is bad, but it's never that bad. And it never smells like something has died or given off that smell of death, right? So then after questioning Karina about the smell, they do go back to speaking about KY and the very last night that she had seen him, which was June 30th. And this was when Karina's story starts to fall apart. She would first tell the authorities that KY on the night of June 30th had decided that he was going to sleep in the kids' room. But then later, she changes that story to him sleeping in the bedroom next to their bathroom. And then a little bit further in her story, she then tells them that, oh no, he was actually sleeping in the basement. So her story doesn't make sense, and where was he actually sleeping that night? Karina would then also tell the authorities that she herself decided to go out and sleep in an RV, but because she couldn't get the AC working in the RV, she decided to come back into the house to sleep in Delilah's bedroom. She then tells the officers that she's really not sure which bedroom KY was sleeping in, whether it was the northwest bedroom or another bedroom, because she was in and out of the house that night. Karina would then tell the investigators that she wasn't really sure when KY left, because when she woke up on July 1st, he was gone already, and she just assumed that maybe he had called an Uber or asked a friend for a ride because all his vehicles were still at the house. She also tells him that maybe he was the one who had moved all of his clothes to a storage facility, because when she woke up, all of his clothes were already gone. So she claims she definitely didn't move them, and he probably did it himself. But for me, how could he pack all of his clothes, load them in the truck the same night, bring them to the storage unit, come back home, and then leave the next morning without a trace? Mostly when she said she was in and out of the house all night. She must have seen him sometime during the night if her and him were both in and out of the house all night and he was packing all of his things to move. She then says that she tries to call him numerous times, but that calls all went to voicemail, and she had just assumed that KY had blocked her number. The investigators would then ask Karina if she was concerned about whether or not KY was going to return. And so she said, he's left before and he's left his truck at home before. So this is very typical, and that's what she tells him. But again, this is a very different story from what Delila was saying to the officers. Karina then follows up with a statement that she herself had been the one to move KY's red truck 4 blocks down the road because she was trying to make space in her driveway. Now here's what's really strange. During the interrogation, one of the investigators tells Karina that they don't believe that KY had left the house or the property alive. She denied that they were in an argument, and she denied that they had a fight, but there wasn't any issues. But then if there was no issues, why did he just get up and leave? And why are you unable to give a solid reason as to why he's left? So later in the interrogation, the police ask her about Taylor's Falls, and she does admit that yes, she did in fact drive to Taylor's Falls, but she had only driven there to go and discard some trash. Now, this is a red flag because Taylor's Falls is about an hour-long drive from the residence. So why are you driving an hour away to go throw away some trash? When the investigators asked her what was this trash, she told them that it was just a bunch of food that she had in her car. Now, at some point during the investigation, the investigators do tell Karina that their cadaver dog had sensed a dead body underneath the shed that she's built. And they would ask her not once or twice, but numerous times, whether or not she buried KY in the backyard. They asked her, did you do something to him? Is he buried there? They gave her multiple opportunities to just confess, but instead of directly answering the question, Karina would try to divert their attention elsewhere. She would tell them, well, there's a hole in the basement that is plugged up. There will be a dead body down there since the bathroom's been remodeled. So at this point, no amount of excuses or diversions were going to help her out of this hole that she's dug for herself. The authorities didn't believe a single word that she was saying to them at this point. Everything Karina was telling them just didn't add up, and they knew that she was probably responsible for KY's disappearance and now his murder. Now on July 31st, 2021, the authorities would finally excavate the area around the shed, and they would uncover a human body wrapped in some type of material. The body was turned over to Ramsey County Medical Examiner's office, and after an autopsy was completed, the body was confirmed and identified as Ku Yang. His body was found to have 2 bullet wounds to the back of the head, and the cause of death was cerebral laceration and destruction from those 2 gunshot wounds. Karina's daughters, Delila and Maylene, would actually go on to a TV show called Evil Lives Here and speak about their experiences in their family and all the horrific events that took place. And during their episode, they would share some really dark and disturbing things about what their mother had put their entire family through. During the episode, Maylene wouldn't be able to call Karina mom, as she really has found it very hard to come to terms with what her mother had done and can't bear to call her mom consistently. Not after everything she's put her children and her partners through. In the show, Maylene, who is Karina's eldest daughter, would begin by sharing the story of how Karina had her at the age of 16. Karina would consistently tell Maylene that she regrets having her because if she hadn't had her or had been pregnant with her at the age that she was, her life would be so different and better off to this day. She often made it very clear that she resented her daughter for this. So Maylene and Delila would state that their mother had a history of physical and mental abuse with all of her children. Delila would often be berated and yelled at by her mother anytime she did anything that her mother was slightly displeased of. Back when Karina was still married to Maylene's biological father, which we'll just call him John, Karina had supposedly taken a hot scolding spoon and had pressed it into Maylene's arm because she apparently stood up in a stool in the kitchen and had accidentally bumped into Karina. And when John came home from work and saw Maylene crying, he would go up to her and ask her what's wrong, what happened. She would show him the burn mark on her hands and he would immediately freak out and call the police. However, no charges were officially pressed because John decided that he didn't want to go through with it and ended up dropping the charges. Maylene would state that John just really wanted to keep the peace in the house and didn't want to put their family through the hassle of lawyers and just really wanted things to work out in their marriage and in their family. So that's why he dropped the charges and would continue to put up with so many things that Karina would just put him and the children through. Now, in another incident, this one probably being the most crazy and disturbing, one day when John would return home from work, he would notice that there was this really strange smell in the house, and upon investigating, John would find Karina standing in the middle of their home in the living room holding a bottle of gasoline and then going around the house pouring it into different rooms. So John begins to freak out because Karina starts screaming at him, telling him that she's gonna burn this entire house down. And what's really terrifying is that their children were present in the house and witnessing all of it. They were terrified while watching their mother trying to burn down their home with all of them in it. So John decides to call one of the relatives, and the relatives end up rushing over to their home. And once there, they manage to actually get Karina to settle down and actually not light the house on fire. Apparently the couple had been having marital problems, but what really shocked the whole family was instead of just leaving, Karina resorted to trying to burn their home down with her children and everyone else in it. This understandably terrified the children and their father, and soon after that, John and Karina would decide that they just couldn't continue on with their relationship. The two ended up divorcing, and John would confess later that he was grateful that he was able to leave the marriage when he did, because he was convinced that if he had remained in the marriage, he wouldn't be alive to this day. So after the divorce, Karina would end up with custody of the children, and she would take them all to Wisconsin, where she would move on and then meet Ku Yang. So Karina and KY would go on to have 2 children together. Now, Maylene and Delila stated that KY was an amazing father to them and their siblings, and in the beginning, it really did seem like they had a really nice blended family. Maylene would state in the show that initially things seemed to be working out really well in their family. It seems like Karina and KY were in a really good place. However, things would begin to change once Karina started to show her true colors again. It all started when Karina would begin to act jealous about KY's close relationship with her stepdaughters, and instead of being happy about this, Karina would get really upset about it. There was this one time when KY was fixing up an old car for Delila, and when Karina saw this, she went into a fit of rage, went out into the garden, found a few bricks, and started smashing bricks into the windows of the car. Karina had apparently done this because she was trying to get KY's attention, and she wasn't happy about the fact that KY was giving some of his attention to her own children. And while KY was aware of all of Karina's issues, his love for Karina and the children made him stay in the relationship and forced him to put up with her frequent madness. Later in their marriage, Karina would end up installing cameras around their house, and at one point she even installed cameras in their kitchen. Delila would discover that these cameras were installed so that Karina could keep an eye on KY while he wasn't at home. One time, Delila was in the car with her mother when they were out, and her mother would pull out her phone and would pull up the app and would just monitor KY at home. She would do this constantly, and at one point Delila would ask her mother why she was watching him. And Karina would just say, "You never know what he's doing. He could be cheating on me." She was convinced that KY was cheating on her or was going to cheat on her, and that's why she needed to monitor him. This consistent fear of him cheating would cause her to go insane, and whenever KY would be out with his friends and family, she would tell her daughters to go with her, and they would end up driving around the city for hours just trying to find him. Karina was incredibly paranoid and seemed to always need to know where KY was at all times. And despite all of the fighting and yelling and abuse that Karina would cause KY, Maylene and Delila stated that he was always very kind to their mother and loved her very deeply. Now, as their marriage went on, things seemed to get worse, and Karina seemed to continue to get more psychotic. At one point, Karina started telling her daughters that she was angry with her stepfather and that she was going to murder them. She would even say those things to KY directly, and while it did scare KY and the children, they didn't really believe that she was capable of actually hurting them. However, as their marriage went on and the threats kept happening, KY did eventually become pretty wary and started to get a little suspicious. At one point, KY told Delila and Maylene that he was getting very worried about all of the threats that he was receiving from their mother. KY would say that at night before going to bed, he would wait for Karina to fall asleep first before going to bed himself, because he had started to worry that Karina would do something to him. And in April 2011, KY would go into Maylene's room and would shake her awake and tell her that her mother was trying to burn the house down. So as her and KY go downstairs, they find Karina standing in the kitchen throwing newspaper on top of the stove with the burners on. When Maylene and KY would confront her and tell her to stop, Karina would end up pulling out a knife from the kitchen block and waving it around, screaming at Maylene and tell her to go back to bed and to mind her own business. So KY would tell Maylene to go back to bed because it didn't seem safe. Maylene would agree, so she starts heading back up the stairs to her bedroom. As she is heading back, she hears KY scream, "Ow, that hurts." And when she runs back to the kitchen, she finds a knife stuck in KY's back. Karina had thrown a knife at KY and it hit him in the back. Maylene would then end up calling the police, and they would arrive shortly and take Karina in for the night. Despite all of that, KY still didn't press charges, so Karina was then released. However, before Karina was released the next day, KY would tell Maylene that she needed to call her biological father and to take her siblings to go live with him because it wasn't safe for them to live in the house anymore. Maylene would agree, and she would call John, who would make the drive down to get her and bring her and her siblings back to live with him. She would be in her father's custody for a year because they did get a protection order in place, which allowed John to receive full custody of them for that whole year. Unfortunately, the day that the protection order and that custody order expired, Karina would immediately take back the children. However, she didn't take all of them back. She would only end up taking back 3 of the youngest children and leaving the 3 oldest children with John. Delila, being the youngest in that family, was taken to live with Karina. Delila was really disappointed about this because she went back to live with her mother, where she was then abused by her once again. Coming back home, Karina would tell Delila to never speak with her older siblings ever again and to just cut contact with them. She even said to never communicate with her father again as well. Eventually, KY and Karina's marriage would deteriorate because things just continued to get so bad, and this is when they would agree with each other that they would get divorced, remodel, and sell the home, and then go their separate ways. But of course, things would be much more tragic. Now I must say, Delila is a smart and intuitive person because as KY disappeared and conversations with Karina became unbearable, Delila decided that she would start recording the conversations with her mother because she just sensed that something was really wrong. So here's a small audio clip of their conversations.
I do not care if he comes
me for going. You stay always stuff better. I love you. Oh, care. I move on. Don't ever talk about the past. Don't ever talk about. He cares. Oh, he's still daddy. Dad. He never stepped up. Dad, I move on. Don't ever bring his name up. I was just asking because sometimes, like, I don't give a.
After KY had been missing from their home for a few days, Delila would reach out to her older sister Maylene, who again was living with their biological father, and she would tell Maylene about all the things that was going on in the home, and then also tell her that something was wrong. KY was missing. And this is when the two sisters would agree that they would try their best to figure out what happened to KY. And the concern that they had for KY is actually what prompted Delila to make that phone call to the police. On July 22nd, after that phone call that she made to the police, she and the officers would actually go on to work very closely to figure out what happened to KY. Delila would communicate with the officers daily to share information with them. Whenever she spoke to her mother and she found out information, or whenever something strange was happening in the home, she would tell the officers via text in her phone. And in her phone, she would also change the names of the officers to names of people that she knew in school, so that if her mother ever saw those text messages, she wouldn't know that they were officers that she was communicating with. So she's a very, very smart person. Now, here's a little surprise. On July 29th, on the day of Karina's arrest, Karina was getting ready to pack up the house and flee with the children. Karina had started to panic and wanted to flee because she knew that the police were onto her. Investigators had actually tried to visit Karina and question her twice before the 29th of July, but both times Karina would catch them coming from the cameras that she had put up in her home, and she would tell the children to hide, settle down, and to not say anything until they left. Karina had done this on 2 separate occasions to avoid speaking with the investigators. So on July 29th, as I mentioned earlier, Karina is getting ready to flee her home with her children. And so Delila sends a text to the investigators and she tells them, "You need to hurry on over to my house right now because my mother is getting ready to take us and flee to who knows where." So the officers hurry over to the residence and they finally catch Karina just as she's stepping out of the front door and arrest her. And then, as mentioned earlier on in the video, she's taken in for questioning where they uncover she had murdered KY. The children were devastated to learn about KY's death, and they were even more devastated to know that their own mother had done this to their father. After the arrest, Karina would be held in custody with a $2 million bail, and she would later plead guilty to the murder. She would be charged with murder with intent and not premeditated murder, and on March 29, 2022, she would be sentenced to 22 years in prison. And one thing I have to say about this case is just how brave and resilient these two girls were in solving the case of their missing stepfather. And a lot of bad allegations. People online were just saying that like her relationship with her stepdad was too close, and that it was something more than just a father and daughter relationship, which I feel is just horrible, because just because you're their stepdad doesn't mean that you can't have a good relationship with your stepkids. She also made a statement online, and this is what she said. She said, "Just so you know, I no longer have a mom. This may be my biological mother. However, I only refer to her as Karina. Don't bring her up to me anymore. Don't ask me about her. I am sick to my stomach. She abused his kindness and extorted him when she could. She is a narcissist, manipulator, abuser, and psychopath. She felt absolutely no remorse. My stepfather raised me. He wasn't perfect. None of us are, but he genuinely cared about me and my siblings. He was interested in me as a person. He was smart, strong, hardworking, and loving. Always gave us whatever we wanted, worked really hard for us to keep on living a nice life. I am forever grateful for him. Hearing how he was a good person to others makes my heart break even more. Several days after my suspicions, I'm glad you visited me in my dreams. I'm glad you warned me. Even though I hesitated, doubted myself, and some told me to not say anything, I'm glad I did what I did. I'm glad I could help you. I know you're proud of me. and I know you're watching over us. So this case is very devastating, and it's sad that they lost someone that actually really cared about them. And kind of going through social media, you can see that they are healing and they are doing well. They're graduating school and doing all of that. They're still succeeding in life, and so it's really good to see that. And they still pay tribute to their stepdad on social media, so it's really nice to see that. But yeah, so this is the end of this case. This is the most recent Hmong true crime case that I could find. It's so heartbreaking to read all of this and do all of the research. It is my first case, so you probably saw my eyes looking down a lot, and I'm probably just reading a lot, but hopefully I'll get better at this. But thanks for watching, guys. Stay safe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Later.